Hey there, welcome to Bread Arrows. Tonight, we've got hours of chilling horror stories combined with soothing rain sounds to help you relax and sleep. Before you drift off, leave a comment below and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is. If these stories give you chills, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Get cozy and let the fear take over. Have you ever wondered how far technology can control us? The question echoed through my mind as I stared at the glowing monitors arranged across my cramped Portland apartment. Blue light painted the walls in shifting patterns, creating an otherworldly atmosphere in the darkness. The rain outside drummed against the windows with a steady rhythm. But inside, the only sounds were the quiet hum of computers and the soft clicking of my keyboard. My name is Jordan Rivers, and I make my living exposing the secrets that tech corporations would rather keep buried. For the past 8 months, I had been investigating Neuraltech Industries, a biotechnology company that claimed to be developing revolutionary brain-computer interfaces. But the deeper I dug, the more disturbing the picture became. Tonight felt different. The air seemed charged with electricity, heavy with the weight of discovery. I had finally managed to decrypt a series of internal communications that painted a picture far darker than anything I had imagined. My coffee had grown cold hours ago, but adrenaline kept me alert as I scrolled through document after document. A soft chime from my computer broke the silence. A new message had appeared in my encrypted inbox, sender unknown. My pulse quickened as I opened it. The text was brief and chilling. Stop digging or face the consequences. You have 24 hours. I leaned back in my chair, heart pounding. Someone was watching my investigation, tracking my digital footprints. The thought sent a chill down my spine. I glanced around my apartment, suddenly aware of how exposed I felt despite being on the 15th floor. Outside, Portland stretched out like a circuit board, lights twinkling in the darkness. The city pulsed with life, unaware of the digital web being woven around its citizens. I turned back to my screens, where the evidence lay spread before me like pieces of a massive puzzle. The files told a story of illegal human experimentation, of volunteers who had signed up for clinical trials and never returned home. Neuraltech was testing neural implants that could monitor and potentially control human thoughts and emotions. The implications were staggering. A sudden noise from the hallway made me freeze. Footsteps, deliberate and measured, growing closer to my door. I quickly saved my work to an encrypted drive and slipped it into my pocket. The footsteps stopped right outside my apartment. I held my breath, listening. 3 soft knocks echoed through the silence. Then silence again. I waited, every muscle tense, but no one spoke. After what felt like an eternity, the footsteps retreated down the hallway. My phone buzzed, causing me to jump. A text message from Emma, my closest friend and cybersecurity expert. Something strange is happening with the network traffic around your building. Are you okay? I typed back quickly, not sure. Can you meet me at the old coffee shop on Morrison? I need to show you something. On my way, came her immediate reply. I gathered my laptop and the encrypted drive, making sure to wipe any traces of my recent activity from the desktop computer. If someone was monitoring me, I couldn't make it easy for them. The rain had intensified by the time I reached street level, turning the sidewalks into rivers of reflected neon light. The coffee shop was a 24-hour place that attracted night owls and insomniacs. Its dim lighting and background chatter provided perfect cover for sensitive conversations. I found a corner booth where I could watch both entrances and settled in to wait. Emma arrived 15 minutes later, her short black hair damp with rain. She slid into the booth across from me, her sharp eyes immediately scanning the room. "You look terrible," she said, keeping her voice low. "What did you find?" I pulled out my laptop and angled the screen toward her. Neuraltech isn't just developing brain interfaces. They're conducting illegal experiments on human subjects. People are disappearing, Emma. Her expression grew serious as she scrolled through the files. "This is massive, Jordan. If this is real, we're talking about crimes against humanity. It's real. I've verified the sources and cross-referenced the data. But someone knows I'm onto them. I got a warning tonight." Emma's fingers flew across her own keyboard as she ran security scans. "Your digital footprint shows signs of surveillance. Someone has been tracking your online activity for weeks." A chill ran down my spine. How is that possible? I use encrypted connections and secure browsers. Neuraltech has access to advanced artificial intelligence systems. They could be using predictive algorithms to monitor potential threats. She paused, her face pale in the laptop's glow. "Jordan, we need to be very careful. If they're willing to make people disappear, they won't hesitate to silence a journalist." As if summoned by her words, the coffee shop door opened, and a tall man in a dark coat entered. He moved with predatory grace, his eyes scanning the room methodically. When his gaze fell on our table, he smiled coldly. "Time to go," I whispered, closing my laptop. We slipped out through the back exit into the alley behind the shop. The rain had turned the narrow space into a maze of shadows and puddles. "My car is parked 2 blocks away," Emma said, leading the way through the labyrinth of back streets. Our footsteps echoed off the wet pavement as we moved quickly through the darkness. We reached her vehicle without incident, a small electric car that hummed quietly to life. As we pulled onto the main road, I noticed headlights following us in the side mirror. "I think we have company," I said. Emma glanced in the rearview mirror and pressed harder on the accelerator. "Definitely being followed. Hold on." She took a sharp right turn, tires squealing on the wet asphalt. The pursuing car stayed with us, its headlights cutting through the rain like searchlights. "Where are we going?" I asked, gripping the door handle as Emma navigated through increasingly narrow streets. "I know someone who might be able to help us. Dr. Lisa Martinez used to work for Neuraltech before she left under mysterious circumstances. She's been living off the grid ever since." We drove for another 20 minutes, the pursuing car gradually falling behind as Emma used her knowledge of Portland's winding streets to lose them. Finally, we pulled up outside a modest house in a quiet residential neighborhood. Dr. Martinez answered the door on the first knock, as if she had been expecting us. She was a woman in her early 40s with graying hair and tired eyes that held a mixture of fear and resignation. "I wondered when someone would come asking questions," she said, stepping aside to let us enter. "I've been waiting for 3 years for someone to investigate what Neuraltech is really doing." Her living room was spartanly furnished, with heavy curtains drawn across all windows. "I can't offer you much in the way of comfort," she said, "but I can offer you the truth." We settled on her couch as she retrieved a tablet from a hidden compartment in the wall. I was part of the original research team that developed the neural interface technology. At first, it seemed like a miracle. The ability to help paralyzed patients control computers with their thoughts, to treat depression and anxiety disorders directly in the brain. Emma leaned forward, her technical curiosity evident. What changed? Marcus Sterling took over as CEO 2 years ago. He saw the military applications, the potential for mass surveillance and control. The research shifted from healing to manipulation. Dr. Martinez's voice was heavy with regret. We began testing on unwilling subjects, homeless people, psychiatric patients, anyone society wouldn't miss. I felt sick as the implications sank in. How many people are we talking about? Hundreds, maybe thousands. They have facilities across the country, all operating under different corporate names. The technology has advanced to the point where they can monitor thoughts, alter emotions, even implant false memories. Emma's face had gone pale. That's not possible with current technology. Current public technology, Dr. Martinez corrected. Sterling has connections to black-budget government programs. They're decades ahead of anything the public knows about. A soft beeping sound came from her tablet. Her expression changed instantly from resignation to alarm. Motion sensors around the house. Someone's coming. We moved quickly to the windows, peering through gaps in the curtains. Dark figures were surrounding the house, moving with military precision. "Back door," Dr. Martinez whispered urgently. We slipped through her kitchen and out into the backyard. The rain provided cover as we crouched behind a garden shed, watching the house. Flashlight beams swept across the windows as the figures entered. "There's a drainage tunnel that leads to the next street," Dr. Martinez said, pointing to a concrete opening barely visible in the darkness. "It's our only way out." The tunnel was narrow and filled with cold water that soaked through our shoes. We crawled through the darkness for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Finally, we emerged on a quiet street several blocks away. "Now what?" Emma asked, shivering in the rain. Dr. Martinez looked haunted. "I have a safe house in the mountains, about an hour's drive from here. It's isolated and off the grid. We can regroup there and figure out our next move." We found an all-night car rental place and used Emma's credentials to get a vehicle. The drive into the mountains was tense, every set of headlights in the mirrors making us hold our breath. But gradually, the city lights faded behind us, and we climbed into the forested hills. The safe house turned out to be a small cabin nestled among towering pine trees. Solar panels on the roof and a backup generator provided power, while a satellite dish ensured internet connectivity. Inside, the walls were lined with servers and communication equipment. "I've been documenting everything for 3 years," Dr. Martinez explained as she powered up the systems, waiting for the right moment to expose them. The screens flickered to life, displaying a web of connections that spanned corporate boards, government agencies, and research institutions. At the center of it all was Marcus Sterling and Neuraltech Industries. "This is incredible," I breathed, studying the data. "But how do we get this information out without Sterling silencing us permanently?" Emma was already at work on her laptop. "We need to upload everything simultaneously to multiple news outlets, government watchdog groups, and social media platforms. Make it impossible to suppress." "There's a problem," Dr. Martinez said quietly. "Sterling has people everywhere. The moment we start transmitting, they'll trace the signal back to us. I felt the weight of the situation pressing down on me. We had the evidence to expose one of the most dangerous conspiracies in modern history, but revealing it might cost us our lives. We don't have a choice, I said finally. People are dying while we debate. We have to take the risk. Emma nodded, her fingers already flying across the keyboard. I'm setting up encrypted channels to multiple destinations. Once we start, we'll have maybe 10 minutes before they pinpoint our location. Dr. Martinez activated additional security systems around the cabin. I'll monitor the perimeter. If they find us before the upload completes, we'll need to buy more time. The upload began at exactly 3 a.m., progress bars slowly filling as terabytes of data flowed across the internet. My heart pounded as I watched the percentages climb. 10%, 20, 30. Each second felt like an eternity. Movement detected on the access road. Dr. Martinez called out from her monitoring station. Multiple vehicles moving fast. Through the windows, we could see headlights winding up the mountain road toward us. Emma's fingers never stopped moving as she optimized the data streams and rerouted traffic through backup servers. 50% uploaded, she announced. We need more time. The sound of engines grew louder as the vehicles approached. I could make out at least 3 black SUVs through the trees. How long until they reach us? 2 minutes, maybe less, Dr. Martinez replied, her voice tight with tension. Emma suddenly looked up from her laptop. I have an idea. If I can create a false signal trail leading away from here, it might buy us the time we need. Her hands flew across multiple keyboards as she implemented her plan. The progress bar crawled towards 70% as the first SUV pulled into the clearing around the cabin. Powerful spotlights illuminated the building, turning night into harsh day. A voice boomed from a megaphone. This is a federal investigation. Exit the building with your hands visible. Federal my foot, Dr. Martinez muttered. Sterling's private security team. The upload reached 80% as heavy footsteps surrounded the cabin. We could hear them testing doors and windows, looking for entry points. Almost there, Emma whispered, sweat beading on her forehead despite the cool mountain air. A loud crash echoed through the building as the front door splintered open. Flashlight beams swept across the main room as tactical teams entered. 95%, Emma announced. We huddled in the server room as footsteps approached. The handle turned slowly, and the door began to open. Upload complete, Emma shouted just as the room flooded with armed figures. I raised my hands, feeling a mixture of triumph and terror. We had done it. The truth was out there now, spreading across the internet faster than anyone could stop it. Whatever happened to us next, the world would know what Marcus Sterling and Neuraltech Industries had been doing. The lead operative stepped forward, his face hidden behind tactical gear. You have no idea what you've just done, he said, his voice distorted by electronic modulation. We've exposed the truth, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. People have a right to know. He laughed, a cold sound that sent chills down my spine. The truth, you've only scratched the surface. Neuraltech is just one small part of something much larger. As they secured us with restraints, I caught Emma's eye. She gave me the slightest nod. Hidden in her code, triggered by keywords in the uploaded files, was a secondary program that would continue investigating and exposing the conspiracy long after we were gone. They led us outside into the harsh glare of the spotlights. More vehicles had arrived, and I could see dozens of operatives securing the area. But in the distance, I noticed something that filled me with hope. News helicopters circling overhead, their cameras recording everything. The story was already breaking across social media. My phone, before they confiscated it, had shown hundreds of notifications as journalists and activists shared the leaked files. Sterling might be able to silence us, but he couldn't silence the entire world. As they loaded us into separate vehicles, Dr. Martinez called out, "Remember, this is bigger than just neural tech. Follow the money, follow the connections. The truth is still out there." The SUV pulled away from the cabin, carrying me back down the mountain toward an uncertain future. But I felt a strange sense of peace. We had started something that couldn't be stopped. The digital shadows that had hidden Sterling's conspiracy were dissolving in the light of exposure. Hours later, as dawn broke over Portland, I found myself in a holding cell with no idea what charges I might face. But through the small window, I could see protesters gathering outside the building, their signs demanding answers about Neuraltech Industries. Emma and Dr. Martinez were being held somewhere else in the facility, but I knew they were probably watching the same scene unfold. The truth had a way of spreading like wildfire once it escaped its cage. A guard approached my cell. "You have a visitor," he said, unlocking the door. I was led to a small interview room where a woman in a business suit waited. She introduced herself as a federal prosecutor, but her first words surprised me. "Mr. Rivers, I want you to know that your investigation has triggered a multi-agency task force. We've been trying to build a case against Sterling for years, but we lacked the evidence you've provided." Relief flooded through me. "So we're not facing charges. On the contrary, you're going to be our star witnesses. But I have to warn you, Sterling has powerful allies. Your safety will be our top priority, but this fight is far from over." Over the following weeks, the Neuraltech scandal exploded across international headlines. Congressional hearings were called, government contracts were suspended, and Sterling found himself facing federal charges ranging from human experimentation to conspiracy. But as the prosecutor had warned, the conspiracy ran deeper than any of us had imagined. Other corporations emerged with similar technologies. Other officials were implicated in cover-ups. What we had uncovered was not just one company's crimes, but a glimpse into a shadow world where human consciousness itself had become a battlefield. Emma, Dr. Martinez, and I were relocated to safe houses while the investigations continued. Despite the danger, we kept working, following digital trails that led to military black sites, pharmaceutical companies, and technology firms around the globe. 6 months after that rainy night in Portland, I stood before a Senate investigative committee, raising my right hand to swear an oath to tell the truth. The hearing room was packed with reporters and family members of victims, people who had finally found answers to their loved ones' disappearances. As I began my testimony, I thought about the question that had started it all. Have you ever wondered how far technology can control us? Now, I knew the answer was further than most people could imagine, but also that the human spirit of resistance could be just as powerful as any machine. The fight against digital tyranny was just beginning, but for the first time in months, I felt hope. The shadows were retreating, and in their place, the light of accountability was beginning to shine. Sterling was convicted on 37 federal charges and sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole. Neuraltech Industries was dissolved, its assets distributed to victim compensation funds. But most importantly, new laws were passed regulating neural interface technology and protecting human consciousness from unauthorized intrusion. Dr. Martinez established a foundation to help survivors of the experiments, while Emma founded a cybersecurity firm specializing in protecting whistleblowers and journalists. As for me, I continued investigating the remaining threads of the conspiracy, knowing that vigilance would always be the price of freedom. The digital age had brought incredible benefits to humanity, but it had also created new forms of oppression that required constant vigilance to detect and defeat. Our victory against Sterling was just one battle in an ongoing war for the soul of human consciousness itself. As I sat in my new office overlooking the Columbia River, watching the sun set over Portland, I reflected on how much had changed since that night when anonymous threats first arrived in my inbox. The city looked the same, but I knew that beneath its peaceful surface, millions of people were now aware of threats they had never imagined. Knowledge was power, but it was also responsibility. We had opened the world's eyes to the digital shadows that surrounded us all, and now it was up to everyone to remain vigilant against those who would use technology to control rather than liberate the human spirit. The question that had started my investigation about how far technology could control us had evolved into a new question. How far would we go to protect our freedom? The answer, I now knew, was as far as necessary, no matter the cost. What if history refuses to stay buried? The question lingered in the musty air of the Springfield History Museum's basement as I stared at the weathered file before me. It was just another Tuesday afternoon, surrounded by the familiar scent of old leather bindings and forgotten memories. I had always been drawn to the past, to the stories hidden in dusty corners, but this discovery felt different. A cold shiver ran through me as I opened the manila folder, revealing documents that seemed to pulse with secrets from decades past. My name is Jordan Rivers, and I had spent the last 3 years cataloging historical artifacts for the museum. Each item told a story, each document held a piece of someone's life. But this collection felt alive somehow, as if it was reaching out from beyond time itself. As I examined the papers, an uncomfortable sensation crept over me, like invisible eyes watching from the shadows of the cluttered storage room. The basement was unnaturally quiet, broken only by the soft hum of fluorescent lights overhead. I glanced toward the small window near the ceiling, where late afternoon sunlight filtered through grimy glass, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. Yet something felt wrong, as if the very air was holding its breath, waiting for something to unfold. Among the documents, one letter immediately caught my attention. It was written on cream-colored paper, now yellowed with age, addressed to someone named Victoria Ashford. The handwriting was elegant yet trembling, filled with desperate urgency. "They know our secret," it read. "They're watching the house. We cannot let them discover what we've hidden." My pulse quickened. Who were they, and what terrible secret had been concealed? I couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just historical research. Something about Victoria's story pulled at me, creating an unexplainable connection that transcended time. Her fear seemed to seep through the ink, wrapping around me like a suffocating fog, making the basement feel smaller and more confined. As I continued reading, a soft scratching sound echoed from the far corner of the storage room. I froze, every muscle tense as I strained to listen. "It's nothing," I told myself, "just mice in the walls." But the hair on my arms stood on end, and my heart began to race. I forced myself to focus on the letter, pushing away the growing unease. With each sentence, the tension mounted. Victoria wrote about shadows moving in her peripheral vision, whispers that followed her even in broad daylight. The way she described her terror resonated with something deep inside me, a primal fear that made my hands shake. Was I imagining things, or was there truly something lurking in this basement? The fluorescent lights flickered suddenly, casting erratic patterns on the concrete walls. My breathing became shallow as I heard the scratching again, louder this time, more deliberate. It seemed to echo the very words I was reading, blurring the line between past and present, between Victoria's reality and my own. Suddenly, the heavy door at the top of the stairs creaked open, and footsteps descended slowly. I turned to see my colleague, Tyler Brooks, making his way down with a concerned expression. "Hey, Jordan, you've been down here for hours. Everything okay?" I managed a weak smile, though my heart was still pounding. "Just researching something unusual." I gestured to the file, trying to shake off the dread that clung to me like a second skin. Tyler raised an eyebrow, but didn't press further. "Well, don't let it consume you. Remember that project we did on the old Riverside Asylum? Some stories are meant to stay buried in the past." His words echoed in my mind, planting seeds of doubt. What if I was delving into something that should remain undisturbed? But the nagging curiosity wouldn't release its grip. I felt like I was standing at the edge of a dark precipice, staring into an abyss that stared back. As I prepared to dive back into the documents, a flicker of movement caught my peripheral vision. I spun around, heart hammering, but saw nothing except shadows dancing in the dim light. I took a deep breath, willing myself to stay calm. Fear couldn't control me now. But as I began reading again, the whispers grew stronger, more insistent. "Help me," they seemed to plead. "You must uncover what really happened." The words reverberated in my mind, drawing me deeper into the mystery, deeper into Victoria's world of terror. I looked at Tyler, but he was absorbed in his own work, completely unaware of the growing darkness that seemed to surround us. The shadows appeared to thicken and swirl, like storm clouds gathering in the basement. I felt an overwhelming urge to flee, to escape this oppressive atmosphere. But I was already too invested in the story. The old clock on the wall ticked ominously, each second marking my descent into something beyond my understanding. I could feel it, the weight of unseen presence, the suffocating fear of the unknown. What had Victoria encountered all those years ago? What secrets lay buried in these documents? My pulse raced as I flipped through more pages, desperation driving me forward. I needed answers. I needed to understand the danger that seemed to lurk in every shadow. But with each document I examined, the tension escalated. The mundane basement transformed into something sinister, and reality began to blur with the supernatural. Then I discovered a photograph tucked between two letters. A group of people stood together outside a large Victorian mansion, their faces showing a mixture of joy and unmistakable terror. At the edge of the frame, a dark figure loomed, its features completely obscured by shadow. My breath caught in my throat. The figure felt familiar, as if I had encountered it before in dreams or nightmares. I slammed the file shut, my heart racing wildly. My thoughts spiraled out of control. What if this was more than just historical documentation? What if Victoria's fears had been justified? What if the shadows she described were real and they were still here? As the daylight faded outside the small basement window, I knew I had crossed a line. The whispers grew louder, an urgent call for help echoing in the deepest recesses of my mind. I wasn't just uncovering forgotten history anymore. I was stepping into a world of darkness, a realm where the past could reach out and consume the present. And I could feel it building, the weight of history pressing down on me, a tangible tension that promised only one outcome. The unknown was about to reveal itself, whether I was ready or not. The moment the last traces of sunlight disappeared from the basement window, an eerie stillness settled over the storage room. The clock's steady ticking now felt like a countdown to something terrible, each tick amplifying the oppressive silence that surrounded us. I glanced at Tyler, who remained focused on his cataloging work, completely oblivious to the shadows that seemed to be growing longer and darker around us. The photograph of the mysterious figure still haunted my thoughts, its presence lingering like a specter in my mind. Do you believe some places can hold on to the past? I asked suddenly, surprising even myself with the question. Tyler looked up, his brow furrowed in confusion. Hold on to the past? You mean like historical preservation? That's literally our job, Jordan. His practical response frustrated me. There was an undercurrent of something deeper here that I couldn't explain. I mean something more than that. What if some events leave an imprint, a kind of emotional residue that never fades? Tyler chuckled, shaking his head dismissively. You've been reading too much Gothic literature. History is just facts and dates, nothing more supernatural than that. But I wasn't convinced. The fear I had felt while reading Victoria's letters was too real, too immediate. What about the stories we uncover? Some things feel like they want to stay hidden for a reason. Tyler shrugged and returned to his work. Dead people don't have opinions about their stories anymore, Jordan. They're just records now. I wasn't so sure. The terror in Victoria's writing felt alive, pulsing with urgency even after all these years. They're watching the house, her words echoed in my memory. What if those words held more truth than I wanted to acknowledge? I felt that same uncomfortable sensation creeping up my spine, as if invisible eyes were studying my every movement. I turned back to the file, my heart still pounding. The photograph was missing. I blinked hard, confusion washing over me like a cold wave. Had I put it somewhere else? I frantically searched through the scattered documents, panic beginning to rise in my chest. The shadows in the room seemed to stretch and reach, like grasping fingers trying to pull me into their darkness. Hey, have you seen a photograph? I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady and normal. Tyler glanced up again, this time with genuine concern crossing his features. No, I haven't touched anything. Are you feeling all right? You seem really on edge. Yeah, it was right here a minute ago. I gestured vaguely at the table, feeling my heart rate increase. The absence of the photograph felt significant, ominous even, as if its disappearance was a warning of something much worse to come. Tyler shrugged and went back to his work, but my eyes were drawn to the darkened corners of the basement. I could almost see shapes shifting in the gloom, as if they were waiting for me to let my guard down, to become vulnerable. My imagination was running wild, but I couldn't stop the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I pulled out my phone, trying to distract myself by scrolling through social media. But the bright screen felt artificial and lifeless compared to the palpable energy that seemed to fill the basement. The cheerful posts and mundane updates did nothing to calm the growing knot of anxiety in my stomach. I needed to understand what had happened to that photograph. After several tense minutes, I stood abruptly. "I'm going to check the supply closet," I announced, forcing confidence into my voice that I didn't feel. I didn't wait for Tyler's response. I needed to be alone to escape the suffocating atmosphere that seemed to be closing in around me. As I stepped into the narrow hallway that connected the storage areas, a sense of dread settled over me like a heavy blanket. The air felt thick and oppressive, heavy with secrets that had been buried for decades. I walked slowly, my footsteps echoing off the concrete walls. Every small sound seemed amplified, every whisper of air conditioning, a reminder that I wasn't entirely alone down here. The supply closet was at the far end of the hallway, its door slightly ajar. I pushed it open, the old hinges protesting with a long, drawn-out creak. Inside, boxes were stacked haphazardly from floor to ceiling, and a single overhead bulb cast harsh shadows that danced and twisted along the walls. I began searching through the boxes methodically, hoping to find the missing photograph, or at least some explanation for its disappearance. As I rummaged through dusty containers filled with old museum supplies, a strange odor began to fill the small space. It was sharp and metallic, reminiscent of old copper pipes or tarnished silver. The smell made my stomach turn and my head feel light. I paused in my searching, glancing around the cramped room. The scent was overwhelming, unlike anything I had ever encountered in the museum before. "Get a grip, Jordan," I muttered to myself, trying to push through the growing unease. I continued my search, but the anxiety gnawed at me like a persistent ache. Suddenly, a soft rustling sound emerged from the far corner of the closet, and I froze completely, my heart jumping into my throat. "Hello?" I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. No response came, just the continued rustling, growing louder and more deliberate. It sounded like something was moving among the boxes, shifting and searching just out of my line of sight. With each careful step I took toward the sound, the darkness seemed to deepen and thicken around me. I strained to see through the shadows, my breathing becoming shallow and rapid as I caught a glimpse of movement, something dark darting behind a tall stack of storage containers. I moved closer, the rustling stopping abruptly, as if whatever was there knew I was approaching. "Tyler," I called, hoping desperately that it was just my colleague playing an elaborate prank. But no answer came. The silence was deafening, pressing in on me from all sides like a physical force. I approached the stack of boxes cautiously, my hands trembling as I reached out to touch the cardboard. Suddenly, a tremendous crash erupted from somewhere behind me, and I spun around, adrenaline flooding my system like electricity. The closet door had slammed shut, plunging me into complete and total darkness. Panic seized me as I fumbled desperately for the handle, but it wouldn't turn or budge no matter how hard I tried. I was trapped in this small space with whatever had been making those sounds. My breathing quickened to the point of hyperventilation, and I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears like thunder. Then the whispering began again, softer now but unmistakably present. "Help me," the voice seemed to say, each syllable like a ghostly caress against my ear. "You must uncover what they tried to hide." I felt a presence in the closet with me, a weight that pressed down on my chest and made it difficult to breathe. The flickering overhead bulb cast grotesque, writhing shadows that seemed to move independently of any physical object. The line between reality and nightmare began to blur as desperation clawed at my throat. I pounded on the door with both fists. "Let me out. Someone help me." The darkness felt alive, reaching out with invisible tendrils to wrap around my thoughts and drag me deeper into terror. My rational mind fought to maintain control, to focus on finding a logical explanation. Victoria had faced this same fear decades ago. If I was going to uncover her truth, I had to confront my own growing panic. With a surge of determination born from desperation, I took a deep breath and turned back toward the shadows. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice echoing in the confined space. "What do you want from me?" For a moment, absolute silence filled the closet. Then, as if the very air around me was shifting and changing, the whispers grew louder and more coherent, forming actual words. "The truth lies buried beneath lies. Dig deeper, and you will understand everything." Suddenly, the door burst open without warning, flooding the small space with harsh fluorescent light from the hallway. Tyler stood there, his eyes wide with alarm and confusion. "What happened?" I heard shouting and banging. I stumbled out of the closet, still shaking from the experience. I heard something in there. It was like voices speaking to me. "We need to leave this place immediately." Tyler stared at me with growing concern etched across his face. "You're not making any sense, Jordan. Let's just get back to the main floor and take a break." I shook my head vigorously, still feeling the oppressive weight of whatever presence had been in that closet. "We need to go now, Tyler. This basement. There's something wrong here. Something dangerous." As we made our way back toward the storage room, I couldn't shake the feeling that unseen eyes were following our every movement. My heart continued to race, thoughts swirling with dread and anticipation. What had I awakened in this place? What truth was waiting to be discovered in the darkness? The museum's basement held secrets that were far from buried, and I was only beginning to scratch the surface of something much larger and more terrifying than I had ever imagined. The harsh fluorescent lights of the basement corridor flickered ominously as I followed Tyler back toward our makeshift office space. My heart was still racing from the encounter in the supply closet, each beat echoing the urgency of my troubled thoughts. What had I experienced in that cramped darkness? The whispers still rang in my mind, their chilling message haunting every step I took. "The truth lies buried beneath lies. Dig deeper, and you will understand everything." Tyler glanced back at me with obvious concern written across his features. "You're really shaken up, aren't you?" His voice was steady, but I could detect an underlying tremor of unease. "You need to calm down. It's just old building noises and your imagination running wild." I wanted desperately to believe him, to dismiss the fear that was eating away at my composure from the inside. But deep in my gut, I knew there was something far more sinister lurking in the corners of this basement. Something that was awakening, something directly connected to the history we were uncovering piece by piece. I can't explain what happened in there, Tyler. It felt completely real, like someone was actually there with me, watching and waiting. We stepped back into our work area, the familiar space now feeling suffocating and oppressive. The stacks of files on our metal desks seemed to lean toward me, whispering secrets I wasn't prepared to hear. I forced myself to focus, to regain control of the spiraling chaos in my mind. Let's go back to Victoria's documents. There has to be more information we're missing. Tyler hesitated for a moment, but eventually nodded his agreement. And together, we returned to the table where I had spread out the mysterious papers. I reopened the file carefully, the letters and photographs arranged before us like pieces of an intricate puzzle waiting to be solved. My fingers traced the elegant curves of Victoria's handwriting, feeling the weight of her desperate words. We need to figure out exactly who she was and why she was living in such terrible fear. As I sifted through the documents more methodically, I discovered another letter that had been tucked beneath a stack of old receipts. This one was even more frantic than the first, the ink smudged and blotted as if it had been written in tremendous haste. If anyone finds this, you must leave immediately and never return. They are coming for all of us. Do not trust anyone, especially those who claim to help. My breath caught in my throat as I read. Who was she trying to warn, and what kind of danger had she been facing? "Jordan, look at this," Tyler said suddenly, pointing to a yellowed newspaper clipping that had fallen from the folder onto the floor. It detailed a devastating fire that had consumed a large Victorian mansion on the outskirts of town several decades ago. The blaze so intense and fast-moving that it had destroyed most of the structure within hours. This might be connected to everything we're finding. Look at the date. My pulse quickened as I examined the article more closely. The mansion that had burned was mentioned specifically in Victoria's first letter. She must have been living there when it happened. We need to find out exactly what occurred that night. Tyler nodded, a spark of investigative curiosity beginning to override his earlier concern. Let's see if we can locate the property. Maybe there are still some remains or records that could help us understand what really happened. As we searched through more archival materials, the atmosphere in the basement grew increasingly thick with anticipation. The more we uncovered, the stronger the sense of impending danger became. I could feel something wrapping around us like a dense fog, a palpable entity that seemed to be watching our every move from just beyond our vision. After nearly an hour of digging through old city records, I finally located a hand-drawn map of the area from that time period, its edges frayed and yellowed with age. "Here it is," I said, tracing my finger along the marked roads until I found the location. "It's about 30 minutes outside of town. We should go there now, before we lose daylight completely." Tyler looked uncertain, glancing around the basement, as if sensing the same oppressive presence I had been feeling. "Are you sure that's a good idea after everything that's happened today? What if it's just an empty lot with nothing left to find?" "That's exactly why we need to go," I replied, urgency threading through my voice like a live wire. "We've already opened this door to the past. We can't turn back now without knowing the complete truth." After some additional persuasion and discussion, Tyler finally agreed, though his reluctance was obvious. We gathered our materials and headed upstairs, leaving the basement's oppressive atmosphere behind us. As we stepped out into the fading afternoon light, the world felt different somehow, heavier, as if the very air had thickened with unspoken mysteries and hidden dangers. The drive to the old mansion site was quiet except for the steady hum of the engine and the occasional rustle of autumn leaves blowing across the windshield. Shadows from the trees danced across the road, elongated by the setting sun into strange, almost human shapes. With each mile we traveled, my heart rate increased steadily. What would we discover at the end of this journey into the past? As we approached the location marked on our map, the ruins of the old mansion came into view through the trees. It was a haunting sight, standing like a skeleton against the darkening sky. Charred timbers and crumbling stone walls were all that remained of what had once been a grand home, now reclaimed by wild vines and overgrown vegetation that seemed to wrap around the structure like grasping fingers. "This place gives me chills," Tyler muttered under his breath, staring at the ruins with obvious apprehension. "We need to search for any remaining evidence or clues," I said, stepping out of the car with determination despite my own growing unease. If Victoria hid something here, we might be able to find traces of it. The front entrance was completely gone, leaving only a gaping doorway that led into darkness. I pulled out my flashlight and stepped carefully over the threshold, my pulse quickening as we entered what remained of the mansion's interior. The air inside was stale and heavy, filled with the lingering scent of smoke and decay that seemed to cling to everything. "Jordan, maybe we should stay close together," Tyler suggested, stepping beside me with his own flashlight. "I really don't like the feeling of this place." "Agreed. Let's start with what used to be the main living area," I replied, trying to suppress the shiver that ran down my spine as we moved deeper into the ruins. As we explored the skeletal remains of the once grand home, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were disturbing something that had been left undisturbed for far too long. The remnants of a previous life were scattered throughout the space. Faded photographs, broken furniture, and personal belongings that told the story of a family whose lives had been cut tragically short. In what appeared to have been the main parlor, a large fireplace still stood intact, its mantle covered in ash and debris that had accumulated over the decades. I crouched down to examine a pile of water-damaged papers that had been scattered across the floor nearby. As I carefully separated the pages, one headline caught my attention and made my blood run cold. "Mysterious fire claims entire family." The words sent a jolt of electricity through my entire body. My mind began racing with possibilities and connections. Could this family be related to Victoria somehow? I read the article aloud to Tyler, my voice trembling slightly. The newspaper described the tragic loss of an entire household in a fire that had started mysteriously in the middle of the night. It detailed how neighbors had tried desperately to help, but had been unable to reach anyone inside the burning structure in time. I felt a sudden chill sweep through the ruined room as I shared this information with Tyler. Victoria must have known these people personally. Maybe that's exactly why she was so terrified. What if she believed the fire was deliberately set? Tyler's expression shifted dramatically, a flicker of realization crossing his face like lightning. Or what if it wasn't just a fire at all? What if there was something much darker happening here? The weight of his words settled over us like a heavy blanket, and I glanced around the burned-out shell of the room, sensing that we were not alone among these ruins. The air felt charged with invisible energy, electric and dangerous. The shadows seemed to pulse and writhe with a life of their own, serving as a constant reminder of the secrets that still lay buried within these walls. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from somewhere deeper in the mansion, sending both of us jumping in startled terror. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. Tyler nodded, his eyes wide with alarm. "We should investigate. It could be a structural collapse, or maybe an animal that got trapped inside." We exchanged a wary glance before cautiously making our way toward the source of the sound, the darkness seeming to swallow our flashlight beams as we moved deeper into the mansion's remains. The air grew noticeably colder with each step, and an overwhelming sense of dread began to settle in my stomach like a stone. With every footstep we took, the feeling of being watched intensified dramatically, the whispers from the museum basement returning now louder and more insistent than before. "Help me," they seemed to plead from all around us. "You must uncover what really happened here." The narrow hallway stretched out before us, shadows dancing ominously in the weak light of our flashlights. I could almost hear the echoes of the past, the voices of people who had lived and died in this place, begging for their stories to finally be told. "Stay close," I whispered to Tyler as we ventured further into the heart of the mystery. As we approached what appeared to be the source of the noise, my heart hammered against my ribs. Whatever lay ahead, I was determined to face it head-on. I could feel the truth calling to me from the darkness, just out of reach, shrouded in decades of secrets and lies. And I knew with absolute certainty that there was no turning back now. We were about to uncover a mystery far more dangerous and complex than either of us had ever anticipated. The deeper sections of the mansion loomed ahead of us like the mouth of some ancient beast. The walls covered in peeling paint and creeping ivy that seemed to clutch at the structure with desperate, gnarled fingers. Each step we took felt weighted with the gravity of our situation, the air thick with an oppressive tension that made it difficult to breathe normally. I glanced at Tyler, whose expression perfectly mirrored my own growing unease. We both understood instinctively that something was fundamentally wrong in this place. The sound that had startled us echoed again, a dull thud followed by a scraping noise that seemed to come from what had once been the mansion's kitchen area. It was a large space where the heart of family life had once thrived, now reduced to charred beams and scattered debris that told the story of lives interrupted by tragedy. As we approached the doorway, I felt a chill creep up my spine, the hair on my neck standing on end, as if electricity was crackling through the air around us. The kitchen was a devastated wasteland, with a collapsed table lying in the center, surrounded by broken pieces of dishes and glassware that caught our flashlight beams like scattered stars. The air carried a faint but persistent smell of smoke, as if the fire from decades past still lingered in the very molecules of this space, trapped and unable to escape. "Stay close," I whispered again, though the words felt inadequate in the face of the growing darkness that seemed to press in around us from all sides. I edged forward carefully, my heart pounding like a bass drum as I scanned the devastated room for any sign of what might have caused the noise. Suddenly, Tyler stepped on something that crunched loudly beneath his foot. "Ow!" he exclaimed, lifting his leg to examine a jagged piece of broken glass that had pierced through the sole of his shoe. "What kind of place is this?" "Just the remnants of lives that were cut short," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "But we need to keep moving forward if we want to understand what really happened here." As we ventured deeper into the kitchen area, a sudden gust of wind howled through the broken windows, causing tattered curtains to flutter wildly like ghostly apparitions. I looked at Tyler, whose face had gone pale in the harsh light of our flashlights. "Did you feel that?" he asked, fear clearly creeping into his voice. "Yeah," I admitted, feeling a knot of anxiety form in my stomach. It's like this place is still alive somehow, still holding onto the past. With renewed determination despite my growing fear, I moved toward the far wall, where old photographs hung at crooked angles. I reached up to straighten one of the frames, and as I did, a small leather-bound journal slipped from behind it and fell to the floor with a soft thud. I picked it up quickly, noting that its cover was cracked and worn from age, the pages yellowed and brittle from decades of neglect. "Look at this," I said, excitement mixing dangerously with the anxiety that was building in my chest. I opened the journal carefully, revealing pages filled with hurried, desperate handwriting that spoke of fear and confusion in every hastily scrawled line. "They watch from the shadows," I read aloud, the words tasting bitter and ominous on my tongue. "I can hear them moving through the walls at night. I don't know how much longer I can stay here before they find what they're looking for." Tyler leaned closer, peering over my shoulder at the faded text. "Who do you think wrote this? Could it be Victoria?" "I'm almost certain it is," I said, my pulse quickening as I recognized the same elegant handwriting from the museum documents. This is her voice, her terror preserved in ink and paper. The tension in the ruined kitchen thickened around us like a suffocating blanket, wrapping us in an atmosphere of dread that made every breath feel labored. I could almost feel the weight of her despair pressing down on my shoulders like a physical force. "Tyler, we need to piece together exactly what happened to her. If she was this frightened, it means there was something genuinely dangerous happening in this place." Just then, another loud crash erupted from the adjacent room, startling us both so violently that I nearly dropped the precious journal. My heart leaped into my throat, and I felt adrenaline surge through my system like liquid fire. "What was that?" Tyler's voice cracked with tension. "I don't know, but we need to investigate," I said, forcing my legs to move despite every instinct screaming at me to run. The journal felt warm in my hands as I carefully tucked it into my jacket pocket for safekeeping. We stepped cautiously into what appeared to have been a formal dining room, a space that had once hosted elegant dinner parties and family gatherings, but now felt like a tomb. The room was filled with oppressive shadows that seemed to move independently of our flashlight beams. And as I swept my light across the space, I noticed a heavy wooden chair lying on its side, as if something had violently knocked it over. "Jordan," Tyler called softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I really think we should get out of here. This place feels fundamentally wrong, like we're not supposed to be here." I nodded, my own instincts urging me to flee this haunted place. But I couldn't shake the compelling feeling that we were on the verge of uncovering something critically important. "Just a few more minutes," I urged, though my own confidence was beginning to waver like a candle in a strong wind. As we moved further into the dining room, a faint scratching sound caught my attention, and I turned toward the wall where I noticed a series of strange symbols carved deep into the charred wood. They twisted and curled in patterns that seemed both ancient and otherworldly, forming designs that hurt to look at directly. "Do you see those markings?" I pointed with a trembling finger, dread creeping through my veins like ice water. "Yeah, what do you think they mean?" Tyler asked, stepping closer to examine the mysterious carvings. "I don't know for certain," I admitted, studying the intricate patterns. "But they look like they could be connected to some kind of protective ritual. What if Victoria was trying to ward off whatever was threatening her and her family?" Before I could process that thought completely, the room seemed to shift around us in ways that defied explanation. The shadows deepened and began to swirl like dark storm clouds, moving with purpose and intelligence. A low whisper drifted through the air, growing steadily louder and more insistent with each passing second. "Help me," it pleaded with desperate urgency. "Uncover what they tried to hide from the world." My breath caught in my throat as the sound seemed to take on physical form, pressing against my chest and making it difficult to breathe. It felt as if the very walls were alive and closing in on us, trapping us in this nightmare scenario. I glanced at Tyler, whose eyes were wide with pure terror. "We need to leave right now," he said, backing away slowly toward the doorway. But before we could turn to escape, the temperature in the room dropped so dramatically that I could see my breath misting in front of my face. An icy wind began to howl through the broken windows, swirling around us like a miniature tornado. The whispers became a deafening cacophony of overlapping voices, all pleading and crying out in languages I couldn't understand. "Jordan," Tyler shouted over the supernatural chaos, panic rising in his voice like a tide. "What is happening to us?" "Stay together," I cried back, trying to keep my voice steady despite the terror that threatened to overwhelm my rational mind completely. As we stumbled toward the doorway, the shadows stretched out toward us like grasping hands with long, clawed fingers. I could feel the weight of something invisible and malevolent pressing down on us, the overwhelming urge to escape coursing through my veins like liquid lightning. We burst out of the dining room and back into the main hallway, slamming the door behind us with tremendous force. But the whispers continued to echo in my mind like an endless loop. Help me find the truth that they buried. What was that supernatural experience? Tyler gasped, breathing heavily as if he had just run a marathon. I honestly don't know, I replied, my heart still racing like a runaway train. But I think we're getting dangerously close to something that has been hidden for decades. Something that desperately wants to be discovered and revealed to the world. Suddenly, the entire mansion groaned ominously, as if the structure itself were awakening from a deep, decades-long slumber. The very foundation seemed to tremble beneath our feet, sending vibrations through our bodies. We really need to get out of here immediately, Tyler insisted, his voice shaking with fear. I hesitated, torn between the overwhelming fear that was clawing at my insides and the compelling urge to continue our investigation. Wait, I said, grabbing his arm. What if there's something important in the upper floors? Victoria's journal mentioned hiding something. We might be the only people who can find it. Tyler shook his head vigorously, his face pale in the harsh beam of his flashlight. Absolutely not. This place is far too dangerous, and we're clearly dealing with forces beyond our understanding. But something deep inside my soul resisted the idea of leaving without answers. I couldn't walk away without knowing the complete story of what had happened in this cursed place. Just a quick look upstairs, Tyler, please. I have to know what Victoria was trying to protect. With tremendous reluctance and obvious fear etched across his features, he finally nodded his agreement. Fine, but we stay together every single second, and at the first sign of real danger, we're leaving immediately. We climbed the narrow, creaking staircase that led to the mansion's second floor, each wooden step groaning ominously under our weight and echoing through the hollow structure like gunshots. As we reached the top landing, I felt a surge of anticipation mixed with pure dread coursing through my veins. The air up here was even thicker and more oppressive, carrying the weight of decades of secrets and sorrow. The upstairs hallway stretched out before us like a dark tunnel, lined with doorways that gaped open like hungry mouths waiting to swallow us whole. The wallpaper hung in long, tattered strips, peeling away from the walls like old skin. Our flashlight beams cut through the darkness, revealing glimpses of what had once been a beautiful family home, but now felt more like a mausoleum. "Look around carefully," I said, my voice barely above a whisper in the suffocating silence. "Maybe there's something here that can shed light on what really happened to Victoria and her family." We split up cautiously, each taking a different room to search, though we made sure to stay within calling distance of each other. I entered what appeared to have been the master bedroom, a space where intimate family moments had once unfolded, but now felt cold and lifeless. The furniture was mostly destroyed, but I could make out the skeleton of a large four-poster bed and an ornate dresser that had somehow survived the devastating fire. I moved deeper into the room, scanning every surface with my flashlight for anything that might provide answers. My eyes fell upon an old trunk sitting in the far corner, its brass fittings tarnished black with age, but still intact. With a surge of excitement, I rushed toward it, my heart pounding with anticipation. "Help me with this," I called to Tyler, motioning for him to assist me. Together, we managed to pry open the heavy lid, the ancient hinges squealing in protest like tortured animals. Inside the trunk, we discovered a treasure trove of personal items. More photographs, bundles of letters tied with faded ribbon, and another small diary bound in cracked leather. The pages were filled with Victoria's elegant handwriting, but this journal seemed different from the first one, more detailed and comprehensive in its scope. "It's definitely hers," I breathed, recognizing the distinctive script immediately. "This might contain the answers we've been searching for." As I carefully flipped through the delicate pages, the air around us seemed to shift and change, becoming charged with electric energy. The whispers returned with renewed intensity, urgent and pleading, as if Victoria's spirit was standing right beside us, guiding our discovery. "Tyler," I said, my voice trembling with excitement and fear, "listen to this entry." She wrote about someone who had been stalking her family for months, someone who wanted to steal something precious that they had hidden in the house. Tyler leaned closer, his face pale but determined. What kind of thing were they trying to protect? I continued reading, my eyes scanning the hurried script. She mentions a collection of documents that could expose a terrible crime, something that powerful people in the town would kill to keep secret. My pulse quickened as the implications became clear. "Tyler, I think she and her family were murdered to prevent them from revealing the truth." Just then, a tremendous crash echoed from somewhere below us, shaking the entire structure and sending dust cascading from the ceiling like snow. My heart sank as I realized what was happening. "We need to get out immediately," Tyler shouted, panic flooding his voice. But as we turned to flee, the bedroom door slammed shut with enormous force, trapping us inside the room. The temperature plummeted so rapidly that frost began forming on the windows, and an otherworldly wind began howling through cracks in the walls. "What's happening to us?" Tyler cried, his voice barely audible over the supernatural chaos that was erupting around us. The whispers became a deafening roar of voices, all speaking at once in a cacophony of desperation and rage. "Help us! They must pay for what they did. The truth must finally be revealed." I felt a presence in the room with us, multiple presences actually, pressing in from all sides like invisible crowds. The air crackled with energy so intense it made my hair stand on end, and shadows began moving independently across the walls, forming shapes that looked almost human. "Victoria," I called out into the chaos, clutching her diary against my chest. "We're trying to help you. Tell us what you need us to do." The supernatural storm seemed to pause for a moment, as if considering my words. Then, slowly, the voices began to coalesce into something more coherent, more focused. "The basement," they whispered in unison. "The truth is hidden in the basement of this house. Find what we died protecting." "There's a basement here?" Tyler asked, his eyes darting around the room frantically. I nodded, remembering a detail from one of the letters. Victoria mentioned hiding important documents in a secret room beneath the house. If we can find it, we might finally understand what really happened that night. The bedroom door suddenly swung open as mysteriously as it had closed, and the supernatural activity began to subside gradually. The whispers faded to a gentle murmur, but I could still feel the presence of the spirits around us, waiting and watching to see if we would follow through on our promise to uncover the truth. "Are you absolutely certain about this?" Tyler asked, his voice shaking with a mixture of fear and determination. "We've come this far," I replied, tucking Victoria's diary safely into my jacket. "We can't turn back now. These people died protecting something important, and they deserve to have their story told." We made our way carefully back down the creaking staircase, our flashlights cutting through the darkness that seemed to part before us like curtains. The mansion felt different now, less hostile and more expectant, as if it were holding its breath waiting for us to complete our mission. In the main hallway, I began searching for any sign of a basement entrance. Victorian houses often had cellars for storage, but finding the access point in a fire-damaged structure would be challenging. After several minutes of careful exploration, Tyler called out from near what had been the kitchen. "Jordan, over here. I think I found something." I rushed to where he was standing and saw that he had discovered a heavy wooden door set into the floor, partially hidden beneath debris and fallen beams. Together, we cleared away the obstacles, revealing a narrow staircase that descended into complete darkness. "This has to be it," I said, my heart racing with anticipation and dread. "Whatever Victoria and her family died protecting is down there somewhere." We descended the steep wooden steps carefully, our flashlights illuminating rough stone walls that seemed to close in around us as we went deeper underground. The air was thick with moisture and the smell of decay. But there was something else too, something that made the hair on my arms stand up with electric anticipation. At the bottom of the stairs, we found ourselves in a small stone chamber that had somehow survived the fire completely intact. The walls were lined with wooden shelves, and in the center of the room sat an ornate chest made of dark wood and bound with iron. "This must be what they were hiding," I whispered, approaching the chest with reverence and caution. Inside, we discovered stacks of documents, photographs, and official papers that told a story of corruption and murder spanning decades. The evidence detailed how prominent members of the community had been involved in illegal activities, using their positions of power to cover up crimes and eliminate anyone who threatened to expose them. My God, Tyler breathed, examining the documents with growing amazement. This is enough evidence to destroy half the powerful families in this town. No wonder they were willing to kill to keep it secret. As I read through Victoria's final letter, hidden at the bottom of the chest, the complete picture finally became clear. She and her family had been gathering evidence of the conspiracy for months, planning to take it to federal authorities who couldn't be bought or intimidated. But somehow their plans had been discovered, and the house had been set on fire to destroy both the evidence and anyone who knew about it. They didn't die in an accident, I said, my voice heavy with the weight of this terrible revelation. They were murdered in cold blood to protect the secrets of people who are probably still alive today. The whispers returned one final time, but now they carried a sense of peace and gratitude rather than desperation and fear. Thank you, Victoria's voice seemed to say directly into my mind. Now the world will finally know the truth. As we carefully gathered the evidence and prepared to leave the basement, I felt a profound sense of responsibility settling on my shoulders. We weren't just historians anymore. We were the guardians of justice for people who had been silenced by violence and corruption. Their deaths would not be in vain, and their killers would finally face the consequences of their actions. The mansion seemed lighter somehow as we made our way back to the surface, as if a great weight had been lifted from its foundations. The oppressive atmosphere that had surrounded us all day was finally beginning to dissipate, replaced by something that felt almost like hope. Outside, the first stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky, and I realized that we had spent far longer in the mansion than I had originally planned. But every minute had been worth it. We had uncovered a truth that had been buried for decades, and soon the whole world would know what had really happened to Victoria Ashford and her family. As we drove back toward town with our precious cargo of evidence, I couldn't help but think about the whispers that had guided us throughout this incredible journey. Sometimes, the past refuses to stay buried, especially when justice has never been served. And sometimes, it takes the living to give voice to the dead, to ensure that their stories are finally heard and their sacrifices are never forgotten. The investigation was far from over, but we had taken the first crucial step toward bringing closure to a decades-old tragedy. Victoria and her family could finally rest in peace, knowing that their truth would live on, and that those responsible for their deaths would face the justice they had escaped for far too long. The August sun beat down mercilessly on the concrete jungle of Portland, turning the city into a sweltering furnace. Heat waves shimmered off the asphalt, creating mirages that danced above the busy highways. In stuffy apartments and air-conditioned offices, people wilted under the oppressive temperatures, dreaming of cool mountain air and an escape from the urban maze. It was in this atmosphere of collective exhaustion that Jake's proposal to flee for the weekend, to visit his old friend Rebecca in the remote mountain town of Pine Hill, sounded like salvation itself. The idea was met with immediate enthusiasm. The group, worn down by the city's suffocating grip, assembled with surprising speed, as if everyone had been waiting for exactly this kind of invitation. There was Jake himself, the eternal optimist and natural leader, whose energy seemed inexhaustible even in the brutal heat. His best friend Marcus, a pragmatic programmer who saw the world through the lens of code and logic, was joining more out of loyalty than any belief in the charm of mountain living. Tommy, the group's comedian, always ready with jokes and up for adventure, though secretly more cowardly than he let on behind his cheerful facade. Lisa, Jake's thoughtful and observant girlfriend, possessed a rare talent for noticing details others missed. Her friend Emma, an emotional and impressionable artist, was seeking inspiration in new places and felt deeply attuned to any shift in mood or atmosphere. Finally, there was David, a relatively new addition to their circle, a quiet, soft-spoken guy with penetrating, attentive eyes. He was passionate about photography, especially abandoned and forgotten places, and collected local legends and folklore, which had drawn him to this particular trip. The journey to Pine Hill proved to be more than just a drive. It was a true test of nerves and endurance. The first few hours on Interstate 5 were manageable, if monotonous. But then, the paved highway ended abruptly, as if cut off by a giant blade. The final 30 to 40 miles transformed into torture, along a broken dirt road that snaked through dense, shadowy forest. The towering Douglas firs and ancient cedars pressed so close to the narrow path that their lowest branches scraped against the sides of Marcus's aging SUV like skeletal fingers, leaving long scratches in the paint. Sunlight barely penetrated the thick canopy above. The air grew heavy and humid, saturated with the scent of rotting leaves, moss, and something else. Something ancient and primal that seemed to whisper of times before civilization. Several times they had to stop and work together to drag fallen, moss-covered logs from across the road, remnants of trees that had toppled in some long-ago storm. Cell phone service had vanished completely over an hour ago, leaving them isolated in this wilderness, cut off from the familiar world of constant connectivity. Well, if this isn't the middle of nowhere, I don't know what is, Tommy muttered nervously, scanning the dark, impenetrable undergrowth on both sides of the road. His usual cheerfulness had noticeably dimmed. Your friend Rebecca better be some kind of mountain woman to survive out here. I hope she's got food, and not just granola bars and trail mix. Come on, think about it, pure nature, silence, fresh air, Jake countered, trying to maintain his optimism, though he too felt a strange, inexplicable unease creeping in. The forest around them seemed not just old, but ancient, almost hostile, as if it harbored dark secrets behind its wall of silence. There was something oppressive about this quiet, something that made the skin crawl. Fresh air, my foot, Marcus snorted, wrinkling his nose at the musty smell. Smells like something died out here a century ago. And the silence is weird, no birds singing, no animals moving around. That's not normal. David sat silently by the window, his fingers gripping his camera. He seemed oblivious to the discomfort, completely absorbed in contemplating the dark beauty of the forest around them. When they finally emerged from the forest tunnel, Pine Hill appeared exactly as you'd imagine after hearing too many horror stories about forgotten places. Small and neglected, as if time itself had abandoned it. About 20 weathered houses were scattered without any apparent order on both sides of a barely visible, grass-grown trail that presumably served as Main Street. No general store, no post office, not even any leaning telephone poles. Nothing that would connect this place to the modern world. The town seemed frozen in some earlier century, maybe even earlier than that. Most of the windows stared at the newcomers with dark, lifeless eyes. Some had glass broken out, others were boarded up with weathered planks. There were absolutely no people on the street. Only a couple of scrawny chickens pecked around in the dust by the roadside, and an old, mangy dog with cloudy eyes watched their slow-moving vehicle, with a heavy, unblinking stare from its spot by a collapsed fence. An oppressive, unnatural silence hung over everything. No children's laughter, no barking dogs except for that one old hound, no creaking screen doors or distant voices. Just the whisper of wind through the trees and their own breathing. "Well, this is straight out of a horror movie," Emma whispered, unconsciously shivering despite the heat. She pulled out her sketchbook and pencil, but for some reason didn't feel like drawing. Like those dead towns, they show right before the monster appears. "Easy there, artist," Marcus chided her, though he couldn't hide his own unease as he surveyed the empty street and dark windows. "It's just a backwoods place. People are probably at work, out in the fields, or wherever they work around here." "In the forest," David added quietly, not taking his eyes off the tree line that pressed right up to the backyards of the houses. Rebecca's house stood at the very edge of town, its back wall almost touching the dark forest. It looked sturdier and better maintained than the others, but still made a gloomy impression. Low-built, constructed from thick logs that had darkened with age, with a metal roof covered in moss and lichen. The carved trim around the small windows was elaborate, but somehow wrong, asymmetrical, as if it depicted not traditional patterns, but writhing figures or intertwined roots. Rebecca herself came out onto the creaking porch as soon as the SUV stopped. A healthy, sturdy woman in her early 30s, wearing a simple flannel shirt and jeans, she smiled broadly and at first glance warmly. But something in her appearance was unsettling. Perhaps it was the shadow in her clear blue eyes, a deep-seated weariness, or some carefully hidden fear. "Finally made it," she exclaimed with somewhat exaggerated cheerfulness, hugging Jake tightly. "I was starting to think you wouldn't make it. Our roads are, well, you know how they are. The Forest Service gave up on them years ago." She greeted everyone else warmly, but somewhat nervously, shaking hands and nodding. But when her gaze lingered on David, the quiet photographer with his attentive eyes, something unreadable flickered across her face, for just an instant surprise, recognition, or perhaps anxiety. She quickly looked away. While they were settling into the house spacious, but with low ceilings, smelling of dried herbs, wood smoke, and something indefinably rustic and old, Jake pulled Rebecca aside, lowering his voice. "Becca, this place feels kind of spooky, to be honest. Too quiet, whereas the town looks completely deserted." Rebecca shrugged, but her smile faltered slightly, becoming less confident. "Oh, some are in their gardens. Others went into the forest early this morning for berries and mushrooms. You know how it is in summer in a small town, lots of work to do. The town's old, not many people left, mostly elderly folks. You'll get used to it, it's peaceful here." "Maybe too peaceful," she added quietly, then quickly changed the subject, offering coffee and showing them where they could wash up after the long drive. The day passed in the bustle of getting acquainted with their new surroundings. They unpacked, explored the house with its massive stone fireplace, hand-hewn benches, and a few religious pictures on the walls. Later, they walked down to the creek's shallow and overgrown with cattails, but with surprisingly ice-cold water that seemed to come from deep mountain springs. They looked around the area. The forest that pressed right up to the town beckoned with its coolness and mystery, but at the same time repelled them with its primeval, untamed power and oppressive silence. David was almost inseparable from his camera, clicking away left and right. He was particularly drawn to the old, gnarled trees at the forest edge and the abandoned buildings on the outskirts of town. Lisa, observant as always, noticed that the few local residents they did encounter at the town's single well or on the path to the creek looked at them strangely. Not exactly hostile, but wary and appraising, as if evaluating them or expecting something. An elderly woman in a dark, almost black headscarf, sitting on a stump beside one of the oldest houses, watched them pass with the unblinking gaze of her faded eyes, silently moving her dry lips as if muttering something under her breath. Marcus tried to strike up a conversation with a gruff man in overalls who was fixing a leaning fence, but the man only grunted something unintelligible and deliberately turned away, continuing his work. Not exactly the welcome wagon, Tommy commented that evening after another unsuccessful attempt to chat with a woman walking by. Maybe they just don't like outsiders. Kind of antisocial. Maybe, Marcus agreed thoughtfully, rubbing his chin. Or maybe they have something to hide from prying eyes. I don't like this town. Not at all. As evening approached and the day's heat began to fade, Rebecca started a fire in the outdoor fire pit. A real mountain setup with aromatic pine smoke and plenty of dry wood. After a refreshing dip in the ice-cold creek, the fatigue from the journey and the day melted away. But a strange, underlying sense of unease and discomfort remained, hanging in the air like an invisible shroud. In the gathering purple twilight, when the western sky took on an ominous crimson hue, Rebecca suggested they sit around the fire in her backyard. She skillfully chopped dry pine logs with an axe, stacked them in a neat teepee formation right on the ground, and quickly started a fire with a single match. The flames crackled merrily, leaping upward, pushing back the approaching night's chill, and the velvety darkness that here, far from city lights, was thick, almost tangible, and full of unclear, muffled rustlings and creaks. The forest stood like an impenetrable wall just a few dozen yards from the fire. The dark, jagged silhouettes of trees against the dying sky looked like figures of giants lying in wait, watching the small humans gathered around the flame. The silence had become almost absolute again. Only the crackling of burning logs and the occasional distant hoot of an owl somewhere deep in the forest broke the ringing stillness. So, fellow explorers and conquerors of Pine Hill, Tommy chuckled, trying to reclaim his usual role as the group's entertainer while pouring brandy into metal camping cups. Perfect time for scary stories. Who wants to start scaring the good folks? Becca, maybe you've got some local legends up here. Bigfoot, mountain spirits, or some other wilderness monsters. They began with familiar urban legends. Bloody Mary summoned in dark mirrors, the vanishing hitchhiker, creepy stories about abandoned hospitals with restless souls, and cursed houses where unexplained things happened. They told these tales with enthusiasm, egging each other on, trying to outdo one another in creating a spooky atmosphere. lowering their voices and making frightening faces. But here, at the foot of the ancient, silent forest, all these stories seem distant, artificial, fake. Urban folklore lost its power in the face of this primordial, indifferent nature. That's all nonsense. Urban boogeyman stories for teenagers, Marcus scoffed, downing his brandy and staring into the flames. No logic whatsoever, just emotions and superstition. Zero evidence. What about you? Don't you believe in anything like that at all? No spirits, no ghosts, no curses, Emma asked, looking at him with interest. As an artist, the world always seemed full of mysteries to her. I believe in the laws of physics, chemistry, biology, and statistics, Marcus shrugged, staying true to himself. Ghosts and other supernatural nonsense are either tricks of imagination, undiagnosed psychiatric disorders, or simple hoaxes. At worst, atmospheric phenomena misinterpreted. You're wrong not to believe, Rebecca said suddenly, quietly but clearly. She had been silent for a long time, staring motionlessly into the heart of the fire, and her face in the uneven, flickering light seemed unfamiliar, stern, and tense. Shadows gathered in the corners of her eyes and mouth, giving her the appearance of some ancient priestess. We have our own stories here, real ones, true ones. All eyes immediately turned to her. Even Marcus showed interest, raising an eyebrow. The atmosphere around the fire suddenly changed, becoming tense and expectant. What kind of real stories? Jake asked, feeling an unpleasant chill run down his spine despite the warmth from the fire. Rebecca's voice sounded unusually serious. About the guardian, she replied just as quietly, almost in a whisper. The forest guardian, not like the friendly giant from children's stories. This one is ancient, older than these forests, older than the town of Pine Hill itself. It's the spirit of this place, its power and its curse, and it demands payment for its protection. She paused, sweeping everyone present with a heavy, meaningful look. The firelight illuminated their troubled faces. You see how quiet and peaceful it is here, despite the isolation. No serious diseases. Natural disasters avoid the town. Livestock almost never dies without reason. No major fires in over 100 years, even though the houses are all wood, dry as tinder. Bears and mountain lions don't come near the houses, even though the forest is full of them. We never have droughts, and when the rains come, it's exactly as much as we need for our gardens. That's all because of the guardian. It watches over its people, keeps them safe and fed. Its people, Lisa asked quietly. You mean the townspeople? Yes, us those who were born here and live here, Rebecca nodded. But such protection requires regular payment. And it doesn't need berries or mushrooms, not bread and salt left on a stump. It needs strength, life force, energy. And it takes that from strangers, from those who come here from outside. The fire suddenly flickered and hissed, as if hit by a sudden gust of icy wind, though the air around them was completely still. The shadows behind the seated figures began to dance and writhe, stretching and distorting their faces into grotesque masks. What do you mean, takes? Tommy's voice trembled noticeably. He nervously glanced at the dark wall of forest. It takes them, Rebecca answered simply and terrifyingly. Every few years, sometimes more often, sometimes less, when it feels the need or decides for itself, it comes out of the forest and takes someone who isn't one of ours, a visitor, a tourist, someone who got lost, a casual hiker, a relative who came to visit for too long. It's rarely seen, almost never. They say it can take any form, animal, tree, whatever it wants, or just remain invisible like the air itself. But you always feel its presence. Bone-deep fear, unexplained cold, a wave of despair and hopelessness. It approaches and drains life to the last drop. Sometimes the body is found later, deep in the forest, dried up like a mummy, or sometimes it's never found at all. That's complete bullshit, Marcus breathed out. His face was pale, and his hands shook slightly as he reached for his cup. Medieval nonsense, human sacrifice in the 21st century. Are you serious? It's not exactly human sacrifice, Rebecca shook her head. Her gaze was fixed on the darkness beyond the circle of firelight. It's an agreement, a very old pact. Our ancestors, the first settlers, made it with the guardian when they came to these wild lands. The terms were simple. Don't damage its forest unnecessarily. Don't cut the sacred trees. Don't disturb it. Don't anger it needlessly. And it would protect the town from troubles and disasters. And take its payment in life force when the time came. Otherwise, its wrath would fall on all of us, and then no one would be safe. That's why locals don't like strangers. Not because we're mean or inhospitable, but because we're afraid. Every outsider here is a potential victim for the guardian, and at the same time potential salvation for the town, a few more years of peace. Do you understand? She fell silent, breathing heavily. In the silence that followed, they could hear Emma's rapid breathing as she moved closer to Lisa. David sat motionless as a stone statue, his eyes wide open and fixed on the forest depths, as if he could see or sense something there. Becca, are you serious about this? Jake stared at his friend, not believing his ears. His childhood friend, sensible, reasonable Rebecca, telling such wild, primitive stories. This is just local legend, a scary story for tourists like us. Come on, admit it. A legend that's alive and real, Jake. Rebecca's voice became hard, almost metallic. The old-timers remember specific cases, and not just the old-timers. 10 years ago, a family of campers from the next county over disappeared without a trace. Husband, wife, and teenage son stopped by here looking for a good hiking spot. They found their empty car at the forest edge 3 days later. They searched for them for a long time, with police, with search dogs, nothing. And 5 years ago, a geologist working here, mapping the area, also vanished without a trace. They looked for him with helicopters, everything. Nothing. And that year we had an incredible harvest. The land was overflowing, and winter passed peacefully. At the very moment her last word left her lips, the fire seemed to go mad. The flames roared up 6 to 9 feet high, showering the seated group with a rain of hot sparks and ash. The air around them instantly thickened, became ice cold, chilling to the bone. And just as suddenly, the fire dropped and shrank to a small, guttering bluish flame that barely illuminated their fear-distorted faces. Immediately after this, from deep in the forest, very close to the edge of the yard, came a deafening, dry crack, as if an enormous old tree had snapped under incredible weight, but it didn't fall. The sound was exactly like something being broken in half, with a monstrous crunch that made ears ring and teeth ache. Everyone froze for several seconds, paralyzed by sudden, irrational terror. The silence that followed the crack rang in their ears, pressed on their eardrums. And in this deafening quiet came another sound, heavy, unhurried, measured shuffling, as if something huge was clumsily moving through the forest, breaking dry branches underfoot. Then a low, vibrating growl and rumble that seemed to come from the earth itself, making the hair on the back of their necks and arms stand on end. A sharp, nauseating, stupefying stench drifted over them, an unbearable mixture of swamp mud, damp grave earth, rotting mushroom mycelium, and something else, indescribably ancient, alien, and foul. "It's here," Rebecca whispered with just her lips. Her eyes widened with primal terror, reflecting the tiny flame of the fire. "It heard you, it sensed you. It's come for you." Panic hit like a crushing wave, washing away the last remnants of skepticism, logic, and false bravado. The legend was coming to life before their eyes. They were the outsiders. They were the very payment Rebecca had just spoken of. "Get to the house, everyone to the house now," Jake shouted, jumping to his feet first and knocking over his cup. Everyone rushed toward the safety of the porch. David, who had been sitting slightly apart, closest to the forest, hesitated for a split second, instinctively raising his camera as if trying to make out or capture the source of the sound in the impenetrable darkness. He immediately stumbled over a protruding tree root that lay across the ground. "David, careful," Tommy yelled, turning back at the very doors. But before anyone could react or help him get up, a shapeless, roiling shadow shot out of the darkness between the trees, enormous and blacker than the night itself, merging with the gloom. It covered the fallen David for just a moment. A short, gurgling cry rang out, which cut off as suddenly as it began, as if simply switched off, when the shadow almost instantly pulled back toward the forest, smoothly and silently taking its prey with it. No one remained on the ground, only David's abandoned camera with a cracked lens and a few crushed leaves. The remaining 5, crazed with terror at what they had witnessed, literally flew into the dark entryway and slammed the heavy oak door shut with a crash, hastily throwing the massive iron bolt. They huddled together in the cramped darkness of the entryway, gasping with fear and frantic running, listening to their own hearts pounding deafeningly in their ears. Outside, silence reigned. Terrible, unnatural, ringing silence that was more frightening than any sound. "It took him just like that, right in front of us," Emma sobbed, covering her mouth with her hand to keep from screaming. Her face in the half-light was twisted with horror. "Took him," Tommy babbled, leaning back against the cold log wall. His face was deathly pale, eyes darting wildly. "I saw it huge, dark, like darkness itself." Marcus, though deathly pale, tried to maintain some composure. He carefully pressed his ear to the thick wooden door. "Quiet, too quiet, it's gone." And immediately, as if in response to his words, a sound came from outside. A slow, drawn-out scraping of something sharp and hard against wood. Something was slowly, with a screech, dragging something sharp across the outside of the door, leaving deep grooves in the old wood. Then came a blow, heavy, dull, as if struck by a giant fist or battering ram, making the entire wall of the house shake perceptibly. Then another and another. The creature outside wasn't breaking in with blind rage. It was acting methodically, unhurriedly, as if testing the strength of the barrier, trying it out. "Rebecca," Jake grabbed his friend by the shoulders, shaking her forcefully. Her eyes were empty, unseeing. She was looking through him as if in a trance. "What is this thing? Why did you bring us here? You knew all along." Rebecca slowly turned her absent gaze to him. There was no remorse or surprise in it, only bottomless, age-old weariness and grim acceptance. "I didn't know it would come tonight, so soon, but I knew it could happen. Yes, Jake, I knew it might come for strangers. Otherwise, it would have come for one of ours, for my sick mother, who's been ill for so long, or for me. It always takes what it's owed. Always. The realization hit Jake like a sledgehammer. Betrayal. Cold, calculating, monstrous betrayal by his childhood friend. She had brought them here deliberately, as bait, as a sacrifice for the forest monster, to save her own people. How could you, David? We were your friends, Lisa whispered, backing away from Rebecca. Her voice trembled with horror and disgust. It chose him first, Rebecca replied lifelessly, staring at the door. It needs strength, fresh strength. It will take as much as it needs now. Maybe one will be enough this time, maybe not. Another blow against the wall came, this time even stronger. Dry plaster and dust showered down from the ceiling. Through the cracks between the logs came that same icy cold and disgusting smell of decay and swamp. It's trying to get in, looking for a gap, Marcus shouted, backing away from the wall and pointing to the joint between logs where something dark seemed to be moving outside. Something dark and heavy struck the small, spider-webbed and dirt-covered window in the entryway. The glass rattled pitifully, covered with a network of cracks, but surprisingly held. From the other side came a low, bubbling, displeased growl. We're trapped here like mice in a trap, Marcus said hollowly, realizing the hopelessness of their situation. This whole town is one big trap, and she's working with that monster. They all are. Tommy finally lost all control. He huddled in the darkest corner of the entryway, clutching his head and muttering something incoherent, rocking back and forth. Emma was crying quietly, clinging to Lisa's shoulder. Lisa, though shaking like a leaf, was trying with all her might to stay calm and support her friend. Jake looked at Rebecca with a mixture of burning hatred, despair, and bitter disappointment. What do we do now, Rebecca? You must know. Is there a way to stop it, drive it away, anything? Rebecca slowly shook her head. Her gaze remained empty. It can't be stopped by force. It can't be driven away. You can only wait it out. If it gets satisfied, it will go back to its forest. Until next time. We need to lock ourselves in the house in the farthest room and wait until dawn. It fears the dawn. It leaves with the first rays of sun. Wait, just sit and wait, Tommy exploded, jumping up. What if it breaks through? It's about to tear this place apart log by log. We'll all die. As if in response to his panicked words, the deafening crack of breaking wood came from outside. The creature had begun destroying the porch, methodically smashing its way closer to the door. Into the main room, quickly, everyone into the room, Rebecca commanded, suddenly coming to herself and finding resolve. In there, follow me. She pushed them toward the low door, leading from the dark entryway into the main living area of the house. It was a large, dim room with a massive stone fireplace taking up almost a quarter of the space, wide wooden benches along the walls, a table in the center, and a few faded photographs on the walls. The windows were small, almost like slits, and equipped with thick internal shutters. Close the shutters quickly. Barricade the door with the table. While Marcus and Jake, overcoming their paralyzing fear, feverishly closed and locked the heavy wooden shutters on all the windows, Rebecca and Lisa struggled to drag the massive oak table to the door leading to the entryway. Emma, sobbing and looking around frantically, clumsily helped them. Tommy stood in the middle of the room like a statue. Staring at the door they were barricading with insane eyes, waiting for the inevitable. The blows against the outer wall of the house stopped. Ominous, tense silence fell. "Did it leave? Did it really leave?" Tommy whispered with trembling hope, stopping his rocking. "No," Marcus answered grimly, listening intently to the sounds outside. His hearing was sharpened to the limit. "It didn't leave. It's just looking for another way in, circling the house." And sure enough, a moment later the prolonged scraping came from one of the shuttered windows, then another. The creature was slowly circling the house, testing every board, every gap for weakness. Then the sounds moved upward, to the roof. Heavy, dull footsteps could be heard, the creak of old rafters under enormous weight, as if something incredibly heavy was pacing up there. "It's on the roof," Lisa whispered, raising her head and looking at the dark, planked ceiling. The ceiling above them creaked under the unknown weight. Through the gaps between the boards, decades of dust, small debris, and cobwebs rained down. Something was clearly trying to break through the roof from above, to get to them through the attic. "The fireplace," Rebecca suddenly exclaimed in fear. Her eyes widened with a new realization. "The chimney, it's wide. It could come through the chimney." Jake immediately rushed to the huge stone fireplace. The chimney damper was old and heavy, made of cast iron. He tried with all his strength to push it closed tighter, but it gave way with great difficulty, sticking from rust and soot. At that moment, from above, from deep in the chimney, came a distinct rustling and scraping, and a shower of black soot poured down into the fireplace. "Help me quickly, it's coming down." Marcus jumped to help him, and together, straining with all their might, they slammed the heavy cast iron damper shut with a clang. The rustling overhead stopped, but almost immediately a powerful, dull blow shook the entire massive fireplace from inside the chimney. Then another, the cast iron hummed and vibrated, but held for now. They found themselves under a real siege, trapped in an old, fragile house in the middle of a hostile, silent town, surrounded on all sides by primitive, incomprehensible horror that methodically, with frightening persistence, sought a way to reach its prey. Time dragged by with excruciating slowness. Every second felt like an eternity. Every accidental creak of an old floorboard, every rustle outside a window or on the roof made hearts skip and minds freeze with terror. The silence between the assault attempts was unbearable. It pressed on nerves, filled with suspense and sticky anticipation of the inevitable end. Suddenly, Emma quietly cried out and recoiled from the door, pointing at it with a shaking finger. "There, look, under the door." A weak, flickering, phosphorescent greenish light was seeping through the narrow gap under the door they had barricaded with the table. And from there came that same grave cold and nauseating stench. They also heard a quiet, creeping, hypnotic whisper, like the rustle of dry autumn leaves or the hissing of a snake, but forming some indistinct yet clearly meaningful words in an unknown, ancient language. This whisper made blood run cold in their veins and minds grow cloudy. "It's calling," Rebecca mumbled through pale lips, backing further from the door toward the fireplace. "Don't listen, don't give in. It can drive you mad with its voice alone." The whisper became louder, more insistent, seeming to penetrate directly into their brains, bypassing their ears. It was promising something, luring, tempting, playing on the deepest fears and desires of each person. Tommy covered his ears with his hands again, squeezed his eyes shut, and began rocking from side to side, humming. Go away, please go away." Suddenly, a particularly strong, furious blow struck the door from the entryway. The table barricading it slid several inches into the room. Then another blow, even more powerful. The wood groaned pitifully. Cracks ran along the panels. "Hold the table, everyone push," Jake shouted, first throwing himself against the table. He and Marcus leaned against the tabletop with their full weight, bracing their feet against the floor, trying to keep the door in place. Lisa and Emma, who had regained her composure, pressed themselves against the far wall by the fireplace, frozen with terror. From the other side, a whole barrage of crushing blows rained down on the door, powerful, furious, methodical. Wood chips flew into the room through the widening cracks. The door was visibly bending inward. "We can't hold it. A couple more hits and that's it," Marcus gasped through clenched teeth. His muscles were strained to the limit. "Rebecca," Jake turned sharply to his friend, who stood by the fireplace with an absent, almost insane look, staring into emptiness. "Do something. This is your town, your monster. There has to be a way." Rebecca shuddered as if waking from a deep sleep. She looked from the photographs on the wall to the door that was about to collapse under the creature's assault. A flash of despair and some grim determination appeared in her eyes. "There's only one way," she whispered so quietly she could barely be heard over the cracking of the breaking door. "A very old last resort, to appease it, to give it what it wants voluntarily. Then maybe it will be satisfied and leave ahead of schedule." "Give it what? Give it who?" Jake didn't believe his ears, though he was already guessing what she was getting at. "One person." Rebecca swept her heavy, appraising gaze over Jake's trembling, terrified friends. "It came for outsiders, for your strength. If one goes out to it voluntarily, the others might be saved. It will get its payment and calm down for a while." Dead, deafening silence fell, broken only by the furious cracking of the door being broken down and the heavy breathing of the people in the room. The friends looked at each other with eyes wide with horror. Jake, Marcus, Lisa, Emma, Tommy, 5 outsiders, and Rebecca, the local, who would become this voluntary sacrifice. "You're suggesting we choose one of us and throw him out to feed that thing?" Lisa's voice shook with outrage, fear, and disbelief at what was happening. "It's the only chance for the others to survive," Rebecca almost shouted. Her face was twisted with desperation. "Otherwise it will break through and kill all of us, one by one, slowly. Do you want that?" The door cracked even louder. The upper massive hinge tore away from its mounting with a screech, and the door tilted dangerously inward. Through the wide gap formed, a stream of icy air and unbearable stench of rot and damp earth poured in. In the semi-darkness of the entryway, something huge, dark, and shapeless could be seen moving. "I won't go. No way I'm going." Tommy screamed shrilly, pressing back against the fireplace and covering his face with his hands. "Nobody's going," Jake said firmly, continuing to brace against the table with his shoulder, though he understood it was useless. "We stick together to the end." "You don't understand, you idiots." Rebecca looked at them with a mixture of pity, contempt, and horror. "It won't stop. It's too hungry. The town needs its protection. My mother needs it." At that very moment, the door crashed inward with a deafening roar, hurling the heavy table and Marcus and Jake in different directions like bowling pins. In the doorway, filling it almost completely from floor to ceiling, stood the thing. It was practically impossible to describe in words. It seemed woven from the very essence of the night forest itself, from swirling shadows, rotting leaves, moss, twisted, gnarled roots, and damp earth. enormous, shapeless, constantly shifting its outline, with dozens of writhing, crawling appendages that looked like deformed branches or tentacles. Deep within this roiling, pulsating mass burned two dim, malevolent, dead yellow lights, eyes full of inhuman, ancient hunger and cold hatred for all living things. The creature moved slowly into the room with a deep rumble that made the floor vibrate. Tommy was the first to break and snap. With a wild, piercing scream of terror and despair, he rushed not toward the broken door or windows, but for some reason toward one of the shuttered windows, frantically pounding on it with his fists, trying to break through the barrier. The creature slowly, almost lazily, turned its approximate head toward him. One of its dark, flexible appendages shot forward like lightning, wrapped around Tommy's waist with incredible force, and easily tore him away from the window, lifting him into the air. There was a short, nauseating wet crunch of breaking bones. Tommy went limp like a rag doll, hanging in the monster's grip. The creature brought him closer to its roiling mass, and in the impenetrable darkness of its body, something made a throaty gurgling and slurping sound. When the appendage relaxed, nothing fell to the floor. Emma let out a thin, broken scream and fainted, collapsing. Lisa instinctively covered her, cowering in the corner between the fireplace and wall. Marcus, overcoming the pain from his fall, jumped to his feet, grabbed a heavy iron poker from beside the fireplace, and with a desperate, furious cry, rushed at the monster. The poker struck the dark, churning mass with force, but sank into it like into viscous swamp mud, causing the creature no visible harm. It didn't even flinch. Another appendage, thick and short as a club, lashed Marcus across the head with such force that he flew against the wall and slid down, stunned and motionless. Only Jake remained, slowly getting to his feet after being knocked down, and Lisa, paralyzed with horror, pressing the unconscious Emma to herself. And Rebecca, still standing by the fireplace, not moving. The monster slowly, unhurriedly turned toward them, its dim, hungry eyes fixed on Jake as the largest and strongest prey. "Jake, forgive me if you can," Rebecca whispered barely audibly. Jake saw her bend down and pick up something heavy from the floor, a massive cast iron pot that had been sitting by the fireplace. For a moment, he thought she wanted to help, to strike together with him. But Rebecca swung and with all her strength hit Jake in the back of the head with the pot. A bright flash of pain exploded in his skull. The world swayed and swam before his eyes. As he fell to the floor, losing consciousness, he managed to see Rebecca step back toward the fireplace. The enormous forest creature slowly, inexorably moved toward him, spreading its dark, suffocating embrace. The last thing he heard before consciousness finally faded was Rebecca's quiet, almost tender, but terrible in its ordinariness whisper. "Guardian, here is your payment. Take him, he's strong. He'll be enough for you. Just leave us alone. Until the next time, please." Light silver mist rose from the creek and lowlands, slowly melting in the warm rays of the rising sun. In the town of Pine Hill, a new ordinary day was beginning. Gray smoke curled from a few chimneys. People were lighting their fires. The first drowsy figures of locals appeared in their gardens. An old woman in a dark headscarf came out onto the porch of her sagging house, squinted at the sun, and nodded with satisfaction, looking at the greenery refreshed by the night dew and the clear, cloudless sky. The pact had been fulfilled. Life continued. At Rebecca's house, standing at the very edge of town, it was also quiet. Only the broken door in the entryway, the smashed porch, and several deep scratches on the walls reminded anyone of the nighttime horror. But inside the house, relative order reigned. The traces of struggle had already been mostly cleaned up. Rebecca, pale with dark circles under her eyes but outwardly calm, was giving water from a cup to Emma, who had come to and was still shaking and crying. Lisa sat nearby on a bench, staring at one spot with unseeing, empty eyes. Marcus lay on another bench with his head roughly bandaged with a cloth. He was unconscious, but breathing steadily. The blow had stunned him, but apparently hadn't caused serious injury. About Jake, Tommy, and David, no one asked. They simply weren't there. As if they had never existed in this house, in this town, in this world. The emptiness left behind them was almost tangible. Emma raised her tear-stained eyes full of horror and incomprehension to Rebecca. "What happens to us now?" Rebecca went to the window and looked at the wall of forest, which now in the morning light seemed peaceful, quiet, and even beautiful. She knew what was hidden behind this deceptive beauty. Now the town will live peacefully for several more years, maybe longer. The Guardian got what it needed, it's satisfied. And you need to leave here immediately, before it gets hungry again or before someone from our people decides. She didn't finish, but the meaning was clear. She helped Marcus get up, supporting him, and led him and the two broken, shattered girls out of the house into the yard. Marcus's SUV stood where they had left it the evening before, intact and undamaged, only covered with a thick layer of dew and small forest debris, leaves, pine needles, little twigs. "Leave now," Rebecca repeated firmly, not looking them in the eyes, avoiding their gazes. "Right now. And never tell anyone about what happened here. They won't believe you anyway. They'll say you were drunk, imagined it all. And if someone does believe and comes here out of curiosity, the Guardian really doesn't like curious outsiders. Really doesn't." She turned sharply, and without looking back, walked with quick steps back to her house, to her familiar life under the protection of the ancient monster. The survivors, supporting the groaning Marcus, somehow managed to get into the SUV. Lisa got behind the wheel. The drive back through the same gloomy, shadowy forest seemed like endless torture. The forest saw them off with a silent, heavy, all-seeing gaze. And each of them felt that behind every tree, in every thick shadow, lurked the ancient, merciless guardian of the forest, keeper of Pine Hill, patiently waiting for its next payment. The local legend had turned out to be terrible, bloody truth, and they had paid too high a price for others' peace and prosperity, a price that could never be repaid. What if the truth you were chasing could get you killed? The question echoed through the cramped radio booth, cutting through the steady hum of equipment and late-night static. I leaned back in my worn leather chair, feeling the familiar creak that had become my soundtrack over the years. The red recording light flickered above me, casting an ominous glow across the small studio. It was another sleepless night at KWTV, the only independent radio station left in Millbrook, Oregon. I am Jake Warner, and for the past 8 years, I had been the voice that cut through the darkness for insomniacs, night shift workers, and anyone else who found solace in the quiet hours. My show, Midnight Frequencies, had started as simple late-night talk radio, but lately it had become something more dangerous. I had been digging into stories that others ignored, asking questions that made powerful people uncomfortable. The air in the studio felt thick with anticipation. Coffee-stained notes covered my desk, scattered between outdated equipment and towers of case files. An anonymous caller had reached out 3 nights ago, their voice shaking as they described strange activities at Meridian Pharmaceuticals, the town's largest employer. The caller claimed to be a former lab technician who had witnessed illegal human trials, experiments that had gone terribly wrong. Outside the studio window, the town of Millbrook slept peacefully under a blanket of autumn fog. Street lamps cast weak pools of yellow light along empty sidewalks, and the distant mountains loomed like sleeping giants. But inside this small booth, I felt the weight of something sinister pressing down on me. Every shadow seemed to move, every sound felt amplified. I glanced at the clock on the wall, 2:47 in the morning. My show wouldn't start for another hour, but sleep had become impossible. The manila envelope on my desk seemed to pulse with importance. Inside were photocopied documents, blurry surveillance photos, and handwritten notes that could expose Meridian's darkest secrets. A soft knock at the studio door made me jump. My heart hammered against my ribcage as I turned toward the sound. The station was supposed to be empty except for me. Even our night security guard, old Pete, had called in sick. "Jake, it's Rebecca. Let me in." Relief flooded through me as I recognized the voice. Rebecca Stone was a local blogger who ran an investigative website called Small Town Secrets. She had been helping me piece together the Meridian puzzle, using her network of sources and her fearless approach to journalism. At 28, she had already earned a reputation for taking on stories that other reporters wouldn't touch. I unlocked the door and pulled it open. Rebecca stood in the dimly lit hallway, her dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, her eyes bright with urgency. She wore a black jacket over faded jeans, and I could see she was carrying a laptop bag slung over her shoulder. "We need to talk," she said, stepping inside quickly. "I found something big." I locked the door behind her and gestured toward the guest chair. "What kind of big?" She opened her laptop and pulled up a series of files. "Remember the lab technician who called you? I found him. His name was David Martinez, and he's been missing for 2 weeks." My blood ran cold. Missing. His apartment was cleaned out. His car was found abandoned near the river. The police are calling it a possible suicide, but his sister doesn't believe it. She says David was scared, paranoid, talking about running away and starting over somewhere new. I stared at the screen, watching as Rebecca scrolled through police reports and newspaper clippings. David's face looked back at me from a missing person flyer, young and earnest, with the kind of eyes that suggested he had seen too much. "There's more," Rebecca continued. "I've been tracking other former Meridian employees. In the past 6 months, 3 people who worked in their research division have either quit suddenly or gone missing. And get this, they were all working on something called Project Nightfall." The name sent a chill down my spine. What's Project Nightfall? That's what we need to find out, but I think I know where to start looking. She pulled out a hand-drawn map. David's sister gave me this. He drew it for her the last time she saw him, said it showed where the real experiments were happening. "It's not the main Meridian building, Jake. It's the old Riverside Hospital." I knew the place. Riverside had been closed for 15 years after a malpractice scandal, left to decay on the outskirts of town. Kids used to dare each other to spend the night there, claiming it was haunted. Now I wondered if those ghost stories had been covering up something much worse. "We can't go to the police," I said, thinking out loud. "Meridian employs half this town. They probably have people everywhere." Rebecca nodded grimly. "Which is why we need to get evidence first. Hard proof that can't be ignored or covered up." I looked at the clock again. 3:15. "My show starts in 45 minutes. We could go after I finish broadcasting." "No," Rebecca said firmly. "If they know we're getting close, they might clean everything up. We need to go now while it's still dark." Something in her tone made me pause. "Rebecca, what aren't you telling me?" She hesitated, then reached into her jacket and pulled out a small recording device. "I got a call tonight. Same voice modulator as your anonymous teepster, but this person claimed to be someone different. They said David Martinez isn't missing, Jake. They said he's dead, and we're next if we don't stop digging." The studio suddenly felt smaller, the walls pressing in around us. I could hear my own heartbeat, loud and irregular. "Why didn't you tell me this earlier?" "Because I knew you'd want to back down, and we can't. Too many people have already been hurt. We're the only ones left who can tell their story." I stood up, pacing the small space. Through the window, I could see fog rolling in from the mountains, thick and gray like a blanket trying to smother the town. Everything felt surreal, like I was living inside one of the conspiracy theories I used to dismiss on my show. "Okay," I said finally. "Let's go, but we do this smart. We get in, document what we can, and get out. No heroics." Rebecca smiled grimly. "Agreed." I grabbed my digital recorder and a small flashlight, stuffing them into my jacket pockets. As we prepared to leave, I caught sight of myself in the studio's black window. My face looked pale and drawn, older than my 35 years. My brown hair was disheveled, and there were dark circles under my eyes. I looked like a man who hadn't slept in days, which wasn't far from the truth. We slipped out through the back entrance of the radio station, emerging into the cool October air. My car was parked in the narrow alley behind the building, hidden from the main street. As we walked toward it, every shadow seemed to move, every sound made me jump. "Jake," Rebecca whispered, "look." I followed her gaze to the end of the alley. A black sedan was parked across the street, its engine running, exhaust visible in the cold air. Through the windshield, I could make out the silhouette of someone sitting behind the wheel. "How long has that been there?" I asked. "I don't know. It wasn't there when I arrived." We stood frozen for a moment, unsure whether to run or pretend we hadn't noticed. Then the sedan's headlights flicked on, cutting through the darkness like searchlights. The message was clear. We were being watched. "New plan," I whispered. "We take the fire escape up to the roof and go across the buildings. My car's too exposed." Rebecca nodded, and we quickly retraced our steps. The fire escape was old and rusted, groaning under our weight as we climbed. Each step seemed to echo through the quiet night, announcing our presence to anyone listening. From the rooftop, we could see the entire downtown area spread out below us. The black sedan was still there, joined now by a second vehicle. They weren't even trying to hide anymore. "They know," Rebecca said, her voice barely audible. "Then we better move fast." We made our way across 3 rooftops before finding another fire escape that led down to a side street 6 blocks away. Rebecca's car was parked there, a small blue Honda that looked like it had seen better days. As we drove toward the old hospital, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were making a terrible mistake. But Rebecca was right about one thing. Too many people had already been hurt. If we didn't act now, their sacrifices would mean nothing. The Riverside Hospital loomed ahead of us, a massive brick structure that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Broken windows stared down like empty eye sockets, and ivy had claimed most of the outer walls. It looked like something from a horror movie, which maybe it was. Rebecca parked behind a cluster of trees, hiding the car from the main road. We sat in silence for a moment, both of us staring at the imposing building. "Last chance to back out," she said. I thought about David Martinez, about the fear in the anonymous caller's voice, about all the people who might still be in danger. No backing out. Let's find the truth. We approached the hospital from the rear, where the emergency entrance had been boarded up years ago. But someone had recently removed several boards, creating an opening just wide enough for a person to squeeze through. "Fresh tool marks," Rebecca observed, running her finger along the wood. "Someone's been here recently." Inside, the hospital was a maze of dark corridors and abandoned rooms. Our flashlights cut weak paths through the blackness, illuminating graffiti-covered walls and debris-scattered floors. The air smelled of mold and decay, with an underlying chemical odor that made my nose burn. We followed David's map deeper into the building, past the old patient rooms, and toward what had once been the surgical wing. The further we went, the stronger the chemical smell became. "Do you hear that?" Rebecca whispered. I stopped and listened. Beneath the sound of our footsteps and breathing, there was something else, a low humming, like machinery running somewhere below us. "The basement," I said. "That's where the map leads." We found the stairwell and began our descent. The humming grew louder with each step, accompanied now by other sounds. Beeping monitors, the whisper of air circulation systems, and something that might have been voices. The basement level was completely different from the rest of the hospital. The walls were clean and white, lit by fluorescent strips that created harsh shadows. This wasn't abandoned. This was very much in use. "My God," Rebecca breathed, "what is this place?" We crept forward, following a corridor lined with observation windows. Through the glass, we could see laboratories filled with sophisticated equipment, computer workstations, and things that made my stomach turn. In one room, dozens of glass containers filled with murky liquid lined the walls. In another, a row of hospital beds held motionless figures connected to machines. "Are they?" I started to ask. "I think so," Rebecca replied, her voice shaking. "Jake, we need to document this, all of it." I pulled out my digital recorder, while Rebecca began taking photos with her phone. Every room we passed revealed new horrors. Test subjects in various stages of experimentation, charts tracking the progress of illegal drug trials, and computers displaying data that suggested Meridian had been using homeless people and missing persons as guinea pigs. In one lab, we found files with familiar names, David Martinez, along with the other missing former employees. They hadn't quit or disappeared. They had been silenced, their knowledge too dangerous to let them walk away. "Look at this," Rebecca called from across the hall. She was standing in front of a large window that looked into what appeared to be an operating theater. On the table in the center lay a figure covered by a white sheet, surrounded by monitors and IV stands. As we watched, a door opened and two people in surgical scrubs entered the room. They moved with the efficiency of experienced professionals, checking readouts and adjusting equipment. One of them pulled back the sheet slightly, revealing a face I recognized from the missing person flyers. "That's David," I whispered, my blood turning to ice. "He's alive." But something was terribly wrong. David's eyes were open but vacant, staring at nothing. Wires ran from his skull to a nearby computer, and his body was motionless except for the mechanical rise and fall of his chest. "What have they done to him?" Rebecca asked, tears streaming down her face. Before I could answer, an alarm began blaring throughout the facility. Red lights flashed in the corridors, and we could hear the sound of running footsteps approaching from multiple directions. "We've been made," I said, grabbing Rebecca's arm. "We need to get out of here now." We ran back toward the stairwell, but voices echoed from above us. Heavy footsteps were descending, blocking our escape route. "This way," Rebecca said, pulling me toward a different corridor. We raced through the maze of laboratories, the alarm still shrieking around us. Behind us I could hear shouts and the sound of doors slamming open as our pursuers searched room by room. They were close, too close. We turned a corner and found ourselves facing a dead end. The only way out was through a small window near the ceiling, probably meant for ventilation. "Boost me up," Rebecca said. I interlaced my fingers and lifted her toward the window. She managed to get it open and squeeze through, then reached back to help pull me up. The window was barely large enough for my shoulders, and I scraped against the frame as I forced myself through. We emerged into a narrow courtyard between buildings, gasping in the cold night air. But our relief was short-lived. Footsteps were approaching from inside, and we could see flashlight beams moving behind the windows. "The parking lot," I said, "if we can reach your car." We sprinted across the courtyard and around the main building. Rebecca's Honda was still hidden behind the trees, but as we approached, I saw something that made my heart sink. The black sedan from downtown was parked nearby, along with two other dark vehicles. "They found it," Rebecca said. "Then we run," I replied. "Into the woods, we'll figure out the rest later." We plunged into the forest that surrounded the hospital, branches catching at our clothes and roots, threatening to trip us with every step. Behind us, we could hear voices and see the beams of powerful flashlights sweeping through the trees. For what felt like hours, we stumbled through the darkness, following deer trails and creek beds. My lungs burned and my legs ached, but the fear kept me moving. We had seen too much, learned too much. There was no going back now. Eventually, we reached a small clearing where an old hunting cabin sat abandoned among the pines. It wasn't much, but it would give us shelter while we figured out our next move. Inside the cabin, Rebecca collapsed onto a dusty couch while I barricaded the door with a fallen beam. Moonlight filtered through dirty windows, casting everything in shades of silver and black. "We have to get this information out," Rebecca said, holding up her phone. "The photos, your recordings, people need to know what's happening." I nodded, but I knew it wouldn't be easy. Meridian had resources, connections, power. They had already silenced David and the others. What chance did two small-town journalists have against a corporation that could make people disappear? "There's someone I know," I said finally. "A contact at the State Bureau of Investigation. She owes me a favor from a story I killed years ago, if we can get to her." "Do you trust her?" "I think so. But getting to her means getting out of this forest alive." Outside, we could hear the distant sound of vehicles and voices. Our pursuers hadn't given up. They were setting up a perimeter, waiting for dawn when they could mount a more systematic search. Rebecca leaned against me, exhaustion finally taking its toll. "Jake, what if we don't make it out of this?" "We will," I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it myself. "We have to. David and the others are counting on us." As the first hints of dawn began to lighten the sky, I realized that our nightmare was just beginning. We were no longer journalists investigating a story. We were witnesses on the run, carrying evidence that could destroy one of the most powerful companies in the state. The shadows were closing in around us, but somewhere in the darkness, the truth was waiting to be told. All we had to do was survive long enough to tell it. I checked my watch. 6:30 in the morning. My radio show would have gone off the air hours ago, replaced by dead silence that my listeners would notice. Maybe that silence would be its own kind of signal, a message that something had gone terribly wrong in the quiet town of Millbrook. The hunt was on, and we were the prey. But we carried with us the voices of the dead and the hope of the living. In the end, that might be enough to bring the darkness into the light. Rebecca stirred beside me, her eyes opening to meet mine. What now? I looked out through the cabin's dirty window at the forest that surrounded us, knowing that somewhere out there, our enemies were waiting. Now we run, and we pray that the truth is stronger than the lies that have been protecting them. The cabin creaked in the morning wind, and I could hear the distant sound of dogs barking. They had brought tracking animals. Time was running out. "Ready?" I asked. Rebecca nodded, clutching her phone with its precious cargo of evidence. "Let's go finish this." We slipped out through the back window of the cabin, emerging into a world that would never look the same again. Behind us lay everything we had known. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, and the slim hope that somewhere in the darkness, justice was waiting to be found. The truth was out there, hidden in the signals we had intercepted, the photographs we had taken, and the recordings we had made. All we had to do was live long enough to share it with the world. As we disappeared into the Oregon wilderness, I thought about the words I had spoken so many times into my radio microphone. This is Jake Warner, bringing you the voices in the darkness. Now those voices belonged to the dead and the missing, and it was up to us to make sure they were finally heard. The shadows might be closing in, but the light of truth was growing stronger with every step we took away from that house of horrors. We were no longer just journalists. We were the last hope for justice in a town where the darkness had been hiding in plain sight for far too long. Thank you for spending this time with Brad Arrows. We hope the stories whispered through the rain carried you far into your imagination or your dreams. If you're still awake, let us know how you liked the journey. Until next time, stay safe, sleep well, and let the darkness comfort you.